In a book like Harry Potter, which is all about magic and wizards and is aimed at children, we can't expect everything to be watertight and without plot holes or mistakes. But just because we should expect those things doesn't mean we can't dive in and make fun of them. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about why the Seven Potters was a terrible plan, why Hermione wiping her parents' memories and sending them to Australia is completely pointless, and why Dumbledore's decision-making makes him either stupid, reckless, or more likely both. And by the way, some of these things might not technically be plot holes. They might just be terrible character choices or flawed plot points. Lord knows there's a few of those. But I'm gonna just group them all into the plot hole category for this video. So let's dive into some of my favourite plot holes. So The Seven Potters was the thrilling opening to the final book, and the idea was that having 6 people use Polyjuice Potion to disguise themselves as decoy Harrys was the best and safest plan to allow Harry to leave Privet Drive without being identified, hunted or killed by Voldemort and the Death Eaters. Now the plan came from Dumbledore himself, via Snape, then through Mundungus, and eventually to Moody and the Order of the Phoenix. So it was convoluted, but it came from Dumbledore, so you'd think it would be a good plan, right? Wrong.
Come again?
This is such a stupid, overly complex, not at all thought out plan to get Harry from Privet Drive to his safe house. First, by making 6 decoy Harrys, you're not really protecting the original that much. He still looks like himself, so they'll still go for him. You're just adding a target to the backs of 6 additional people, rather than taking the target off of Harry. At the very least, if you don't mind these 6 people being live bait, then when they've taken the Polyjuice Potion to look like Harry, have Harry take Polyjuice Potion to look like somebody else. Because protecting Harry was the whole point, right? But no, they leave him in plain sight looking the same way he always does. Honestly, 2 seconds of planning could have helped you come up with so many better ideas. And not just a little bit better either, much, much better. Having Harry use Polyjuice Potion to look like somebody else. A random muggle off the street, for example. If the Death Eaters don't know who he's disguised as, the chances of him surviving are far higher. Rather than him being one of 7 Potters, he's now one of over 1 million people in Surrey. Rather than 6 decoys, there are now over 1 million decoys. And you might think that puts over 1 million people at risk of being killed, but the Death Eaters are specifically told not to shoot to kill, because Voldemort wants them to leave Harry for him. So with over 1 million decoys, and the Death Eaters being instructed not to kill Harry and save him for Voldemort, well, the odds are they're not going to kill anybody, just in case. Another idea would be just making an illegal portkey. Like, I know all portkeys are supposed to be registered with the Ministry, and they'd never let a portkey be registered in Harry's house, but an illegal one? I mean, Harry's being hunted anyway. Before long, he's going to be undesirable number 1. You might as well throw in making an illegal portkey as another crime. Plus, we know the portkeys can't be tracked very well, because every safe house that each of the decoys arrives at has a portkey there to take them to the Burrow. And there's no way that all of those portkeys are legal and registered with the Ministry when the Order knows the Ministry is on the verge of collapse. Another much better plan than the one they come up with is to just have Harry wear the invisibility cloak. Have him use the cloak to get onto the London Underground and then ride around on trains for a little while. Not only would he be invisible, but there's no way the Death Eaters would be able to understand the London Underground. Honestly, Mad-Eye Moody is supposed to be one of the most hardened, seasoned, strategically savvy auras the wizarding world has ever seen. Surely he can tell this plan was terrible. There are 24 hours missing from Harry Potter's life. At the very beginning of the Philosopher's Stone, we follow Mr. Dursley for a day. He goes to work, gets lunch, comes home, watches the news, and through all of that he has a number of strange interactions with wizards who are celebrating the downfall of Lord Voldemort. Vernon has a full day of these interactions before the chapter ends, with Hagrid bringing Harry to Privet Drive. That means that Voldemort was defeated a full 24 hours before Harry comes to the Dursleys. But when Hagrid tells Dumbledore the timeline, there's no mention of this extra 24 hours at all. No sir, house was almost destroyed, but I got him out alright before the muggles started swarming around. He fell asleep as we were flying over Bristol, so the house was destroyed. Hagrid shows up and gets Harry out before the muggles notice this destroyed house, and then he brings him to Surrey, and Harry falls asleep over Bristol. There's no mention of a full day between grabbing Harry and bringing him to Dumbledore. The only thing in the middle was him falling asleep over Bristol. So could Harry have just been sat in the rubble for 24 hours? Well, no, because Hagrid said he got to Harry before the Muggles started swarming around. Now, I know Muggles are supposed to be quite oblivious to magic, but I don't think they're so oblivious they could ignore a destroyed building in the middle of their village. So Hagrid must have got to Harry really soon after Voldemort's curse backfired and destroyed the entire cottage, meaning either it took him 24 hours to get from Godric's Hollow to Surrey, which, considering Godric's Hollow is supposed to be in the West Country, should take around 4 hours by regular road, so even less time than that when you're flying. What's more likely is that the timeline just doesn't make sense. That, or Hagrid got drunk and went off for a day without even remembering that he'd done it. Which, you know, I wouldn't put past him. Sticking with Hagrid. His job makes no sense. I don't mean his job as care of magical creatures from the 3rd year onwards. I mean his job as keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. You see, Hagrid got this job after he'd been expelled, when Dumbledore pleaded with then headmaster Armando Dippet to take him on and train him up. And that was immediately after he was expelled, by the way, not a few years later. And therein lies the issue. Hagrid's name has not been cleared, and won't be for about 50 years. So you see, Hagrid was expelled because everybody thought he opened the Chamber of Secrets, unleashing the monster within, which went and murdered Moaning Myrtle. Try saying that 3 times fast. Murdered Moaning Myrtle, murdered. You can't. So if Hagrid was expelled for opening the Chamber of Secrets, causing the murder of a teenager at Hogwarts, how is it that anybody was okay with him immediately coming back as a member of staff at the very school where he committed that crime? Not only that, he was expelled for opening the Chamber of Secrets. And now his job as Keeper of Keys is to literally open and close things around the school. That'd be like if he went around murdering everybody with the killing curse and then putting him in charge of the dueling club. Now I know Dumbledore believed Hagrid to be innocent, but Dumbledore wasn't the headmaster. Armando Dippet was. And Dippet clearly thought that Hagrid was guilty, or he wouldn't have expelled him. Now I know Dumbledore believed Hagrid to be innocent, but nobody else did. Otherwise Hagrid wouldn't have been expelled and had his wand snapped. So why is it that nobody, no teachers, no governors, no parents, nobody has an issue with Hagrid remaining at Hogwarts as Keeper of the Keys when they all believe he was just responsible for the death of a teenager? Dumbledore is often described in Harry Potter as being the greatest wizard of all time and the only wizard that Voldemort ever feared. But he makes a lot of questionable choices. Choices that, in the grand scheme of things, make no sense. And one of these things that he does that doesn't make sense is his complete lack of planning for after he dies, particularly when it comes to Harry and the Horcrux hunt. For somebody who supposedly had a plan all along, I cannot understand why Dumbledore wouldn't have had a portrait of himself made. Now I know he has one in the headmaster's office like every other previous head teacher of Hogwarts, but I mean an additional one. Like how Phineas Nigellus has one in Grimmauld Place and one at Hogwarts, and there are others who have one in Hogwarts and one in the Ministry or in St. Mungo's, and they can go back and forth between them, because we know the portraits are sentient and they can interact in real time. We see Dumbledore interacting with the portraits, sending them off to their other frames to gather information in real time and relay it to Dumbledore. And at the end of the Deathly Hallows, Harry has a conversation with Dumbledore's portrait, and Harry tells Dumbledore's portrait he threw away the Resurrection Stone and he wasn't going to go back for it. When he asks Dumbledore's portrait if he agrees, Dumbledore's portrait does agree. So we know these portraits aren't just echoes of their past selves, because they interact, they take in information, they form conclusions. It's like having the original person there, just in a slightly restricted form. So if a bunch of other previous head teachers can have multiple portraits of themselves that they can go between, why doesn't Dumbledore have a second portrait of himself made up? A portrait he could then leave to Harry in his will. Sure, the Ministry may take it for 30 days like they did with the Sword of Gryffindor or the Deluminator or the Golden Snitch, but after 30 days, it would be Harry's. And then Dumbledore could give Harry a bunch of information all the way through the final book, as he's going through the Horcrux hunt, going through his discovery of the Hallows. Dumbledore could help him process and plan, share information with him, be a sounding board. That would be so valuable to Harry on this journey in the final book, and Dumbledore knows what's at stake here. Why wouldn't he do everything he could to help? Plus, considering Dumbledore literally planned his own death, he definitely had the time to get a second portrait made up, whatever that process may be. He just, for some stupid reason, as usual, decides not to. So look, it's not often we get to call Hermione an idiot, but her plan in the Deathly Hallows to protect her parents is complete lunacy. If you recall, Hermione wipes her parents' memories so they have no recollection of ever having had a daughter, let alone one who knew and was friends with Harry Potter. And when she's done wiping their memories, she ships them off to Australia. And the fact that she does both is where this plan becomes stupid. So why does Hermione wipe their memories? Well, she's worried the Death Eaters will come after them when they find out that Hermione is working with Harry. And so she feels like she's protecting them by taking any information she thinks the Death Eaters might want out of their brains, so they've got nothing to share, nothing to be tortured for. And when she's done that, she ships them off to Australia. But why? Clearly Hermione believes that wiping their memories won't stop the Death Eaters from trying to torture information out of them anyway. The Death Eaters may not believe or care that they don't remember having Hermione as a daughter. And so Voldemort's forces will come after the Grangers anyway, so Hermione ships them off to the other side of the world. Presumably far enough away that she thinks they're out of the reach of the Death Eaters and of Voldemort. But if that's the case and sending them to Australia is enough to put them out of the Death Eaters' reach, why bother wiping their memories at all? Because as we've established, wiping their memories doesn't really stop them being at risk. So leave their memories intact and send them to Australia to safety. But that's the kicker, isn't it? Hermione clearly doesn't believe that sending them to Australia really puts them out of the reach of the Death Eaters. She knows the Death Eaters can still get to them in Australia if they want to. They could apparate there, they could take a portkey, they could fly brooms, hell, they could get a Muggle aeroplane. And since she knows the Death Eaters can reach them in Australia anyway, she wipes their memories as well. Which begs the question, Hermione. If you don't think they're any safer in Australia so you still wipe their memories, why send them there in the first place? Just wipe their memories and leave them at home. But she can't do that because wiping their memories doesn't really protect them, as we discussed earlier. It's just a cycle of doing things that doesn't really protect them. So wiping their memories and sending them to Australia are just two layers of not very much protection. So why bother with either at all? Why are the Order not doing with the Grangers what they did with the Dursleys and putting them in a safe house with protection? Hell, you could even put them in the same house. Put the Grangers and the Dursleys in one house with people like Kingsley protecting it. Although sticking them with the Dursleys might end up being worse torture than what the Death Eaters would do to them anyway. Regardless, Hermione's plan is bonkers. She takes very extreme measures to provide not very much protection. And speaking of Hermione being an idiot, what if she was actually completely useless all the way through the Harry Potter series? How long do you think Harry and Ron would survive? I made a Harry Potter what if video here where I break down the whole Harry Potter series with the scenario that Hermione is completely stupid, can't do simple magic, never reads, and yet she's always just as self-assured in her own abilities. I think it's really funny and actually really interesting how much the series changes, so you might want to watch that video next.